Well, the mission was to neutralize the Japanese Air Force on Formosa, or Taiwan. And if you know the history of the Pacific War, we never did capture Formosa. It was a Japanese stronghold. But more importantly, the geographical location of Formosa to the Philippines meant that their aircraft could fly sorties into the Philippines and upset our program for invading the Philippines. Now, we had already been involved in softening up the Philippines prior to our going to Formosa. And in fact, we made the first raids on Clark Field and Nichols Field in the Philippines. And it became a part of history too, because it was the first time in naval warfare that we turned on lights in order to take aboard aircraft who were running out of fuel.
But they had the pilots who might have ditched.
Yeah, and that was off the Philippines, and this is I'm guessing at the date, probably October 10, 11, somewhere around there. And so then, for whatever reasons, Halsey was the admiral of the Third Fleet, and we were part of the Third Fleet. We were Task Group 38.5 or whatever. He sent us up to Formosa. I don't know how many ships we were in that. We were a task group, and a task group consists of your main ships are the carriers, and then you have cruisers or a battleship or two, and numerous destroyers. And we went up there to neutralize the Japanese Air Force so that they couldn't make runs to the Philippines. And we had pretty good success in bombing their airfields and the damage that we were able to do to them, but we couldn't complete it. And
would your ship have fired shells?
No, we did not. We didn't get that
so
close.
you were covering for the fleet carriers.
Right.
So
which was our primary responsibility.
Okay, yeah.
You know, originally, when the war started, everybody was battleship minded. And we learned very soon, battleships are passé. They're fine for bombarding an island,
right,
or a city or whatever, but what the real weapon was aircraft carriers. So eventually we switched around the whole naval program to protect the carriers, our main weapon.
I suppose a cruiser, because of its high speed, was very adept at that.
Especially a light cruiser, and because we could carry so much fuel, so much more fuel than most ships. And we could refuel destroyers even after we got refueled. But we were fast, and we were maneuverable, and we were also expendable. You'd always take a torpedo before you'd let the carrier take it. But the destroyers would take a torpedo before they let us take it. That's the way the Navy works.
So how did the day develop on the day that you were on October 14th, 1944, that the Houston was torpedoed?
Well, let's go the day before.
Okay.
We were raiding their airfields all day long with no opposition out here on the ocean. I don't know what our guys were experiencing in there, the pilots were experiencing, and under the targets. But then, come dusk, they came out after us. And they had, most of the planes, as I understand it, were twin engine. I think they called them Bettys, or I've forgotten the names for them. It's not important, but, and they were, it was only a few days before the kamikazes. So we did pretty good. I don't know how many we shot down. We had all sorts of paintings on our bridge for the number of aircraft we shot down and so forth. And all the other ships were having a field day too.
Would you get a sense of that in the radio room when a plane was shot down? No, you might not even be aware.
Nope.
You just hear the furious pounding of the guns, I suppose?
Yeah, yeah. And we could darken the sky with shells. We had that much firepower. But I missed all that. The radio men never saw that. Signalmen saw it all. But yeah, we raided them all day the day before we were hit. And they came out at night, and we were successful in avoiding that. Then the next day, that night, in another task group, the Canberra was hit. And she had a pretty good radar crew, as I understand it. So
That was another carrier that was...
no, the Canberra was a cruiser.
Was a cruiser.
But her radar was very important. And on defense, radar is everything. So for that reason, I guess, we were assigned to replace the Canberra in her group because we had a super radar group on the Houston. And we spent the whole day prior to our torpedoing at full speed. No fresh water, no fresh showers, nothing like that. It was all going into the engines,
for boiler
condensers.
water.
Yeah. And we spent that whole day at full speed to catch up with the group that the Canberra was with.
So the Canberra was torpedoed, was a cruiser, was torpedoed but not sunk.
Yeah.
And you were going to replace that ship
Yeah.
on the line.
The Canberra was already under tow by I don't know who. So we got there just in time. And I don't know what time we were hit. That book that you read might have give you the exact time, but
It was early evening.
yeah, I know it was early evening, whether it was 6
Yeah.
o'clock or 7 o'clock, I don't know. Because by the time I got out on deck, it was dark. So we dodged quite a few that night. I knew when we were dodging.
You could feel the ship,
Oh,
the
yeah,
face of
sure.
maneuvers.
Yeah. And
No problem with seasickness?
no, the only time, I'll cover that in a second, the night after when we abandoned ship, I inadvertently swallowed diesel fuel, and that made me sick.
Okay.
That was the nearest I ever
Yeah,
came to
yeah.
being seasick. I retched half the night, but
So you're on line replacing the Canberra. The ship was being attacked
yeah,
by twin-engine Japanese aerial torpedo planes.
aerial torpedoes.
It had shot down several,
Yeah,
but one ultimately hit.
yep.
Where did it strike?
It was, I guess for all practical purposes, I could say midship. I could, if I refer to your book, you could tell you the exact frame where it hit. But it knocked out all our propulsion.
What was your sensation, George, from where you sat? How could you recognize what had happened?
Well, I
Or did
remember
you?
it well. It's like nothing I've ever experienced since. It was a loud explosion. And I had the feeling that the ship jumped out of the water. But we were in a high-speed turn when the torpedo hit. So it hit a strategic spot which broke our keel. And not too many ships remain afloat after a broken keel. Not ships of that size. We were 700 feet long. But I just felt like a boom.
What was the lighting like in your room? Would it be darkened down normally when you were in battle stations like that?
No, if you...
Or was it brightly lit?
Yes. Our doors, that's a layman's term, although airtight, they were light tight. And they were so equipped that if you opened the door, the lights went out. So, because you could see a light many miles away.
So that aircraft wouldn't spot you. So
Yep,
that was a
yep.
foolproof in case someone inadvertently opened it.
And when the lights go out,
hatchway or-
red lights would come on,
Yeah.
which could not be seen very far away. So,
I see.
Yeah, so you maintain.
So what was the first effect? When you say you felt the ship raise, you heard the explosion, you felt the ship raise. Did you lose lighting?
Yes. We had emergency lighting.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Did you feel the ship lose way?
oh yes, yeah, you feel that right away.
It lost power immediately,
Mm-hmm. And
propulsion.
the emergency light went on, and lights went on, and they were adequate. You could do your job with the emergency lights, but there was nothing like having your regular lighting program.
How did the men, I mean, how did you, I suppose you looked around the room at the men that were with you.
Mm-hmm. And we were crowded, of course, as usual, when you're at GQ. And I remember what I think I mentioned a moment ago, the communications watch officer assigned Morissette to go out and see what was going on. And I replaced him at his position. And it was at that time, I think it was at that time or very close to it, I copied a message that was coming from, I think, Halsey, calling for a seagoing tug whose location I did not know, to come to the aid of the Houston.
Now, when you say Halsey, you mean
Admiral Halsey.
Admiral Halsey.
Bull Halsey.
Requesting a tug, a tow for
Yeah.
the,
He,
and at that point you recognized that you were disabled, I suppose, or before that you knew?
oh, I knew that.
You knew that.
Yeah, and
How were communications at that point? How were you communicating? Did you have auxiliary power to receive or send messages?
we had no communication.
No communication.
Nope. I don't even think we had communications with the radar people below us in Combat Information Center.
So you couldn't even talk intership?
No. And that was one of the problems. Our captain, he's on the bridge in combat. And you see that picture, the length of that ship. He has to know what's going on in the forward part, after part, and the midships and all over. And he had to depend upon people running up to him with the information.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't get enough information, to be honest with you. But yeah, the communications were out, and they were working on trying to reinstall it, but to date they hadn't. And then our communications watch officer, he came into the radio room, and he said, I guess we better get rid of the typewriters. It was standard procedure. You had to throw them overboard because of security purposes. I guess a good Japanese code breaker could take the cylinders off a typewriter and make something out of it. I don't know how they would, but
So you were instructed to remove all that equipment and throw it over.
I enjoyed that.
So that was that was the first point that you were able to go out of
I went out.
your
and,
location, yeah?
And by the way,
What was your first impression? Eerie?
Yeah, there was a destroyer pulled alongside on the port side.
Which side of the ship did the torpedo strike?
On the starboard side.
On the starboard side, yeah.
This is the opposite side, port side. And the destroyer came alongside, but it was a stormy night. And the destroyer kept banging into the Houston. And I remember our captain, he had a megaphone. And I remember, I can't recall his exact words, but he told the skipper of the destroyer, you better shove off because...
You're doing damage.
Yeah, well, he said, not only that, you'll sink yourself.
They were thinner skinned than a
much thinner,
cruiser, yeah?
So, and meanwhile, there were people jumping from my ship onto the destroyer, and some who didn't make it. They, you know, as they'd separate, but they were non-swimmers, I guess, but they didn't get a chance to learn. At any rate, yeah, that was my first scene, and
What was the sky like? What was the weather like that evening?
it was stormy, but it wasn't raining, and I could see.
Sun was set?
Oh yes.
So it was a twilight?
Oh, it was even later than that.
Okay.
Yeah, but I could see, and I could see the captain on the bridge, and I was probably maybe 100 feet away, so there was enough light for me to see. But your eyes were accustomed to the darkness at that point too, you know. So with that, I can't recall the captain ever saying abandon ship, but I saw people abandoning the ship. And my abandoned ship station was right where I was standing, right outside the radio shack. And I had a big raft there. And we had practiced abandoning ship at times. So a few people gathered around. Some of them that wasn't even their abandoned ship station. And I, being a strong swimmer, I really wasn't upset about going in the water, but I just wondered when.
How long between, let's say, the torpedoing and when you had to leave the ship?
Probably close to an hour.
Okay.
Or between a half hour and an hour, yeah. And
did you look for people you knew, or did you just?
No, I knew who was. I knew most of the people who were assigned to that abandoned ship station.
Yeah.
But there were many people there who weren't assigned to it.
Was it orderly or was it chaotic?
It was chaotic. Principally because, and this is my opinion, I don't know if it's ever been written in the book, but I think the number of people aboard my ship who couldn't swim was a problem at that time, and it's understandable, you know. When you're on a sinking ship, if you can't swim.
But yet I have to think
Yeah,
back
but
in your boot camp in Sampson, didn't the Navy make you participate or reach a certain level of swimming?
I'm glad you asked that question, Kevin. Yes, and you had to jump off a tower in the drill shed into a pool. I think the tower was 15 or 20 feet high, and which is no sweat for a guy who's used to diving off any kind of diving board and can swim. But it's a terrible, terrible thing for a guy who doesn't know how to swim to go up on a tower and jump into.
Yeah.
So an acquaintance of mine, he wasn't only a few bunks away from me in boot camp. I could name him if it was necessary. He couldn't swim. So he climbed the tower, and he had a life jacket on, K-Poc, you know. They teach you how to do it, because if you jump from a height with a K-Poc life jacket, you could break your neck. So they teach you, and you could also do a job on
How to protect yourself.
other parts of you. So I forgot now what it was, but you had to grab the K-Poc collar here,
Grab down
and
below.
yourself there, and jump.
And make the jump.
So Calvin, he wouldn't jump. And finally they threatened him, and he jumped, but he froze in the water. And he was not a gutless type of guy. He boxed, he was a good man, but he couldn't swim. He froze in the water, and I foolishly dove in to pull him into the side of the pool. I felt so bad for him. I caught hell for it.
Did you?
Yeah. But there was no punishment or anything
Yeah.
like that. So,
Well, probably in the Navy's rush, I got to assume, and there's the rush to staff the ships and the tremendous need for men, they were
Yeah.
pushing people through those
sure they were.
as quick as possible.
And that's one of the things I learned when it took us, let's see, we were torpedoed in October. We got back to the Brooklyn Navy Yard in April. And the first thing they did was all the non-swimmers, well, they made everybody go to swimming class in Brooklyn. And anybody that couldn't swim the length of the pool, they remained and had to go every night.
But that evening, when you were torpedoed, that was one of your things you recognized, was the fact that there were men who were unable to swim.
Yeah.
And probably some men perished because of that.
I remember one fellow coming to me, hey, George, he says, what do? Do I take off my shoes? I take off your shoes if you want. Leave them on if you want. Better off leave them on.
Okay, so you're at your station,
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
abandoned ship station.
Yeah.
Group of men, and ultimately who had to give the order? I mean, I assume the captain did.
Oh, the abandoned ship?
Yeah.
No, he
how
did not.
Oh, okay.
No. But
Well, of course, communications were out.
that's right. And when we were told to dump the typewriters, fine and dandy, that's sufficient cause to think that, hey, something's going on
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
And when I saw the captain, when I observed him telling the destroyer to pull off, meanwhile he had watched and observed these people jumping from his ship and never said anything that I know of. So, hey, I figured 2 and 2 made 4. So I gave the order to my people to go, and no one wanted to be first. So I said, well, okay. Now there was a rope across the deck. I thought, well, I'll let myself down easy. Why jump into it? So we were up on the second deck. So I grabbed the rope, went over, and the rope wasn't tied to anything. So I went ass over tea kettle into all that fuel oil.
Oh, my.
And that's where I
yeah.
swallowed the fuel oil
I
and got
see,
sick.
yeah.
But
Well, in fact, the abandoned ship order had been given. It's understood that the communications were out,
Yeah.
and most parts of the ship didn't hear it. It was assumed, and
Yeah.
about 2/3, I understand, of the crew abandoned ship at that time.
yes, yeah. And
Okay, so what was your experience? You swallowed fuel oil. You scrambled into the raft. How many men did the raft
No,
hold?
we didn't. The raft wouldn't hold all of us.
I see.
No, it would hold 1 or 2. And incidentally, the raft entered the water upside down, so the water and all supplies and everything were underneath.
Oh,
And there were, I think, 35 or 38 of us.
were there any more Japanese aircraft in the area, in the vicinity?
We saw our ships firing, tracers,
So your ship was still able to
Not my ship.
Oh, all right,
No,
I'm sorry.
we weren't firing, that I know of, but we saw other ships firing, probably destroyers or something like that. So the Japanese aircraft had to be there. They were firing at something.
So it was dark, you're in the water,
Yeah.
there's oil. Was there fear of fire?
No.
No.
I don't know about board ship. There may have been, but I don't know of any.
How many men clustered around that raft?
About 38.
38.
Yeah.
Do you remember any of them?
Oh,
Any of the
yes. Yeah. In fact, one person in particular, a fellow by the name of Danforth, he was from Boston, a light, slightly built fellow, nice man, good radio man too. It was a stormy night, and just 2 or 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, we had kind of given up hope of being rescued. And this fellow looked up at the sky as the most fervent prayer I've ever heard. And I can repeat it almost verbatim.
What was it, George?
He looked up at the sky and he says, Lord, if you really want me, you can have me, but not here. Home, in my own bedroom, in a clean white sheet, and my mother in the room. That's a prayer.
But it was from the heart. And
Was it ever?
Yeah.
I lost track of him. I would like to see him today if he's still alive, but most of my contemporaries are gone.
So you say it was stormy. There was some wind, the swells.
Yeah.
Did you ever turn the raft right side up?
No,
or
we
weren't able
didn't.
to?
No, we weren't able to.
So you had no drinking water?
No.
No
Nothing.
supplies?
No,
No
nothing.
lights?
No.
No flashlight?
Well, we had a couple of us had flashlights that we had attached to our belts.
Was that part of your safety gear?
Yeah,
mean,
it wasn't mandatory, but
Yeah, all right.
we had it. And we
Were
had
there
it.
were there other rafts
We
around?
had them in condoms
To keep them waterproofed.
Yeah. But there was no one to flash to.
All the other ships
They're all-
disappeared from the scene?
They were still, on.
They were in
the
motion.
battle. Yeah.
Sure.
So, but they assigned 3 destroyers to
Stand by. And to pick
search
up.
for us.
Yeah, okay.
And well, the destroyer that picked us up was the USS Grayson. It was a converted old 4-piper, and
But it sounded like at one point there wasn't anything in sight? Or did you always have?
no, there was nothing in sight
Okay.
after a little while.
So the order came for those ships to return to that area. They knew at that point that the Houston was wounded
Yeah.
and to search for survivors.
Yeah. Well, meantime, they decided they're going to try and save the Houston, so they ordered the USS Boston, another cruiser, to take it into tow until such time as the seagoing tugs arrived, which would be the next day. And to this day, I don't know where the tugs came from, but they were there the next day. But to get back to being in the water that night, we were hoping that we knew that they would do their best to rescue us if we could.
So you felt confident?
Yeah. And we knew that we were, I think, 30 or 35 miles off the coast of Formosa, which, as I mentioned earlier, we never did capture. So we had a little powwow on our raft, and we had a fellow on the raft who was, I guess you'd call him a root suiter. You know what they are?
No.
Oh, they were the ducktail haircuts and the peg pants and the, the
Okay.
chains, long chains, and so that.
Kind of a dude.
Yeah, and this guy was he was the kind of a guy that, I'm not going to mention his name, but about the only thing you could assign him to was making coffee. And he screwed that up too. You couldn't buy a percolator, and he made coffee one night without water. And the percolator melted all over, and they wanted to kill
So
him.
his skill level was
Yeah.
somewhat
Yeah.
compromised.
Well, anyway, he knew enough about radio, or observed enough about it, that we said, boy, if we get captured, all we got to do is give our name, serial number, and rate. Yeah, but what about so-and-so? I don't want to mention his name. Well, we'll drown him right now. And I saved his life.
He was serious.
Oh,
Was there any, who was the highest rank on your raft? Was there any of that issue?
the highest rank was a warrant officer, a fellow by the name of D. He was an older man.
Did he try to take control of the situation at all?
No, he was so beat up that he survived.
Yeah.
And I met just a few years ago. I met his son, who was very happy to make acquaintance
that's
with me and to
interesting.
hear about his father.
Yeah, that's a good point. Was anybody else wounded or injured on the raft?
No.
Other than now, what was it like to follow, like you say, your first gulp of water was full of fuel oil? What
Yeah.
did that nauseate you?
I had never tasted fuel oil before.
I can imagine.
No, I didn't think a thing of it until it started working on my stomach. And I had an empty stomach. We hadn't eaten.
Yeah.
You know, we were at GQ all day. So you didn't get to go to the mess hall. So that did a job on me. And plus,
To make you vomit?
yeah, oh sure. But there wasn't much to vomit. Then you start retching.
Yeah.
And I guess, well, I had a real sympathy for the poor people who were seasick all the time. Because I never was.
So you were uncomfortable,
Yeah, oh,
to
yeah.
say the least,
Yeah, that's a good way
and
to
in
put
a
it.
compromised position.
Oh,
So what time did you said it was the Grayson that picked you up?
USS Grayson.
And what time did that happen?
Well, it was just before dawn, and that's an interesting thing too. Just prior to her picking us up, and it was the Grayson. We didn't know it was the Grayson at the time. We were bobbing up and down, and we saw this searchlight covering the water, the surface. We said, "Oh boy, we're going to get rescued." And just as the searchlight came here, we went down in the trough and it went right over us. And oh, we were sick over that.
So close, but yet
hope
so
he does
far.
it again.
Yeah.
But they didn't. But they did have us on radar.
Was there any concern of sharks?
No,
No.
no. The water was, I don't know if the water was cold enough, but you're in the water all that time, you get pretty, well, I don't know if there was any hypothermia, but you get pretty cold.
It was, yeah, cooled,
Yeah.
yeah, sure,
Yeah.
cooled off.
In fact, I had an experience with when the destroyer pulled alongside of us. That was only maybe a half hour after that searchlight went by us, and boy, our hopes sank down to the depths when that searchlight went over our head. But they had, I found out later, they had seen us on radar, and they were determined to get us.
Really, they picked you
Yeah.
up on radar.
Yeah, and they came. We have a pretty good surface radar. I'd like to cover that before we're through here. The difference between 1943 and 44
It was a great improvement.
radar. Yeah, but anyway, the destroyer pulled alongside us, and they pulled us all up one by one. Threw down these little life rings on a rope and hoisted us up. And everybody was scrambling to get to the, and I said, "I'm not going to die this way." I said, "I'll wait. They'll wait for me." So I was the last one off the raft. They put the life ring down for me, and I hooked onto it. They pulled me up, which isn't very far on a destroyer. They're not too far above the water. And there was a big bosun mate there with a beard, typical destroyer sailor. He says, "Can I help you to the showers?" And I said, "No, I'm just grateful you picked me up." So he let go of me, and I went, boom, my legs gave out.
Oh, really?
I didn't know that
Yeah.
I didn't have the strength. So he picked me up and carried me to the shower. And of course, we were unrecognizable. We were all black from the fuel and everything. And he helped scrub me down, and they were terrific.
took
They were
good
great.
care of you.
Yep.
George, when you're on the raft, any sleep at all, or did you
No.
find yourself nodding off? No, you had to hang on for dear life.
We were all pretty young.
Yeah.
I was 19, and I was one of the younger ones.
Any recollections where your mind traveled in that time?
Oh yes, yeah. I thought of one of the things I thought of, one of the many things I thought of my boss back in Albany,
Really?
Who-
Why would that be?
who later became a founder of the Cisco food distributors that you see, their big trucks around all
Oh,
over.
sure.
And I remember him always sweating out his deposit every day. And I'm saying, I wouldn't give a damn if I owed $100 million. What the hell do I care? All I want to do is stay alive.
Right.
And I told him about that too later on when I got back to the States.
Right. All of a sudden, survival meant more than money, meant more than a lot
What's
of things.
money?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. How about home and mom and dad and things like that?
Oh, you bet. Yeah, my father was gone, but I thought of my mother and sisters all the time. And I had a girlfriend back home too at the time. I thought of her a lot. But at a time like that, I think you can't help but wonder, why am I still alive? how come, Lord? What do you want of me? I'm not sure of what he wanted of me yet, but I think
It sort of made you question your
Well,
existence and what your purpose
got
was.
married and had 8 children and progressed in business and so on and so forth. So I guess that must be part of it.
Yeah, that's the way to look at it. George, with the torpedoing of the Houston, did you personally know any of the sailors who were killed?
Yes. In fact, I didn't know him well. I just, as a nodding acquaintance, a fellow from Albany by the name of Przinski. He was I think he was a motor machinist, first class, pre-Pearl Harbor sailor. Probably a career man, I don't know. But he was one of the first ones killed.
At what point did you, as part of the crew who abandoned ship, did you learn the deaths? How did you learn of the deaths, and how did you learn the crew members' names and who had died?
Well, it was. It took quite a bit of time to find out who was entombed in the ship. In fact, some of the bodies we didn't recover until we wound up in Manus Island at the dry dock where we could drain the ship.
So as compartments flooded, those men
Oh
were
yeah,
trapped?
yeah. And that had to be at least 1 month, maybe more, after the torpedoing. And by that time, the bodies were in pretty bad shape. And it was a traumatic thing for me because I could not stand the smell of the bodies. And I used to have to leave the ship when they were doing that and go whichever way the wind was blowing, the opposite.
So the ship carried those dead sailors, and
Yep.
and the smell of death permeated the ship. I suppose there was no power on ship, no ventilation.
I don't think we had ventilation at the time. We may have because we did some repair work at Ulithi, an island, an atoll. We were tied up to a repair ship, the USS Hector. I know we were there for Thanksgiving because I had that Thanksgiving menu. But we did get electrical power and what have you going there, and made the ship seaworthy enough to be towed from Ulithi to Manus Island. So I think we did have power for whatever was necessary, but we never had air conditioning, not in those days.
On the Grayson, how much time were you on that before they?
You showed me a picture earlier of the second torpedoing of the Houston, which didn't amount to an awful lot. It hit the rear end of the ship, which is our hangar, and it made a terrific explosion, though. And not a friend of mine, but an acquaintance of mine happened to be standing on the hangar, and shoo, he went into orbit. Survived. In fact, he was picked up by the Grayson. No, things are good on the Grayson. I'll tell you a little anecdote here that impressed me. After I got showered and got cleaned up a little bit, and we were desperate for some sleep, so a fellow brought me down to the compartment that housed the radio men on the destroyer. And if you think quarters and conditions on a cruiser are tight, small, they're much tighter and smaller on a destroyer. Well, there was an empty bunk. So I had all my wet clothes, and I hung them on some sort of a hook there on the bulkhead, and they're still dripping. I laid down on the bunk, the guy assigned to me. He was a radio man, young fellow. And I don't know how long I slept. It was probably 10:30 or so when I woke up. And here's this guy who gave me his bunk. I didn't know it was his bunk. He's laying on the deck in all the water that dripped down from my clothes, sleeping. That's a man I had never known before.
Yeah, I'm sure you were grateful to
Oh,
him.
was I ever. I felt, well, I can't explain my feelings at that, but.
No, but something so basic, so simple, meant so much.
Yep. And that kind of describes naval life, though, to a degree, you know.
You felt the comradeship
Yeah,
was
Yep.
important, and watch out for each other.
Yeah.
So where did the Grayson land you, George?
Well, that's a story in itself. I got so much experience after the torpedoing. The Grayson, I don't know what day it was. It must have been the third day aboard the Grayson. I got to know the commander of the Grayson. I pestered him for all kinds of information. He told me how he and the other destroyers, the concentric circles and so on and so forth, and then out around. So great how they got, and everybody was rescued. I talked to him at great length, and I enjoyed it very much. But he told me, he said, "We've got to get rid of you fellas."
How many men were taken on
We're
board?
running out of I don't know how many the total was, but certainly the 30-some people that I was with were taken aboard. We're running out of cigarettes. We're running out of food.
You were depleting all their reserves.
Yeah, and they were still in combat.
Yep. Did you ever see the Houston again after you were picked up on the Grayson, or did you leave it behind?
Yes, I saw the torpedo, the second torpedo.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, from about 4 or 5 miles distance.
So while it was under tow by the Pawnee, the seagoing tug, or was it still being towed by the Boston?
I don't recall. Probably the Pawnee. I don't know. I really don't recall what was towing it, but I saw the hit.
So there was insult to injury right there.
Yeah, and not only that, but the commander of the destroyer, and that was his title. He was a commander. He circled to pick up a survivor, a fellow by the name of Chadwick, who was blown off the ship with that torpedo and survived pretty well. So then they had to get rid of us. And their first choice was the USS Birmingham, a heavy cruiser. So we pulled alongside the Birmingham. We didn't tie up to her or anything like that. We just came alongside, maybe 100 feet away. And they throw across a breeches buoy. You wouldn't dare stop because it was in combat zone.
For fear of submarines
Yeah,
or what have you.
sure.
So the ships were in motion. They connected with ropes and a
Right.
simple swing
Right.
and a pulley.
Breeches buoy. I guess they call them a bosun chair now. And that's how we transfer from the destroyer to the cruiser.
I imagine that's kind of a delicate operation.
Oh, it's exciting. You can get a wet ass if they.
If the ships converge a little bit, you're in the dunking booth.
Yep.
Now, how did you fare? You came across okay?
Quite well. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was only my first. So we got aboard the Birmingham, and we no more than got the last man aboard and said goodbye to the Grayson. Then GQ, the Jap fleet, come out. So the Birmingham sounded GQ, and the chief radio man, he started assigning people to positions. And he said, "You, Cinney, you go down to Radio 3. Chief, I'd rather go to the brig before I go to Radio 3.
Where was Radio 3?
Way down in the bowels of the ship, and I had enough of the below water stuff. So
did you have a premonition? You just didn't like the feeling?
I just didn't want to go there. I didn't
Yeah.
want to expose myself if I didn't have to.
Was he
So
understanding?
He was I wish I'd gotten his name. But he looked at me and he said, "Where do you want to go?" I said, "I'll go up in the bridge with the captain." He says, "Well, you're superfluous, but go ahead, stay out of the way." I said, "Okay, fine, thank you." That's the last I saw of him.
Yeah.
Went up there in the bridge, and I wasn't up there but a very short period of time, less than a half hour. And the Princeton, a Class A carrier, was hit with a kamikaze, and she was burning fiercely.
Within eyesight?
No,
Oh, okay. So you
But
got reports.
the Birmingham was assigned to go and help her fight her fires. Now we had another problem. They had to get rid of all this personnel first. So the captain gave the order, and just off, a short ways off, was what they call a Kaiser Coffin, which is a baby aircraft carrier. And she came alongside, and I breeches buoy over. I got to be
Transferred again.
real experienced at this. So we all got transferred to the aircraft carrier. And shortly thereafter, the Birmingham tied up to the Princeton and helped fight our fires. And all of a sudden, the Princeton blew all to hell. And I don't know if everybody on the bridge got killed, but there was severe damage on the bridge, where I would have been by my own choice. And I said, Lord, why?
It's twice in a short period of time.
Yeah, in a couple of days. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was a great experience. I'm glad I survived it.
We are too.
Yeah, thank you.
It's fascinating. What did you do in the interim time from when the ship was torpedoed and towed to Ulithi? What was your job, your assignment after that?
Well, I go a little bit before that. After having abandoned the ship, along with 600 or 700 other people, we wound up on two merchant ships. It was gradual. We transferred from one to the other. We finally wound up on two merchant ships, Liberty ships. And we were brought to Pearl Harbor, which was, maybe 6 or 7 days' journey. And when we got to Pearl Harbor, we were quite elated over the fact that they were coming aboard to take all our measurements for hats and clothing and what have you, which meant we were going to the States. In fact, they were due to leave the following morning, 2 shiploads of survivors, to go to San Francisco. That meant home. And that night, late in the evening, a message from the Third Fleet came through that 3 of us radio men had to take transportation, fly, I think it was a China Clipper or something akin to it. It was a big seagoing airplane. We had to fly back to the combat zone and rejoin the Houston. And we all were.
Devastated at that news.
Yes.
To miss an opportunity to get home.
Well, it was pretty good to get home, you know. But anyway, that was our fate. And I guess because we were good radio men, that's why, because the lesser men didn't have to do that. They went home. In fact, I gave one fellow instructions to take my girlfriend out, which he very dutifully did.
Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colony Government Channel.